Welcome to episode 2 of the SNARLcast about indie wargames and their design, coming to you from Snarling Badger Studios. I'm Adam, and I'm here with Vince. How are you doing, Vince?
Hey, I'm great. Your intros continue to be exceptionally good. We talked a little bit before the show of whether or not you wanted me to do an intro or we were going to trade off, and I quickly realized that no one wants to hear my voice as the first thing in their ears compared to your buttery, dulcet tones.
I did have some butter this weekend, so it's probably for the best. This episode's topic, by the way, is what does indie really mean? Which kind of makes sense since we're talking about indie war games and their design. Like, what do we mean when we're talking about indie, and how does that, apply to wargaming and all that shenanigans and whatnot? So we'll get back to that probably in a bit. But my question is, how have you been doing? How have you been doing? Let's just say that.
Yeah, sure. Let me start there. Pretty good. This has been a very busy week for me. I mean, as I know you and, a few other people we know, obviously I've been working a lot. I got a lot of stuff going on with my normal job, and that's been very busy. I've been wrapping up everything with our existing, or our next game. That's what I want to call it. Our existing project is what I was going to say, but that's just a weird way of saying our next game. And I've been prepping for a interesting show that, as of the time of this recording, I'm going to do next week, kind of about a sort of very interesting event that happened in the Age of Sigmar world. So a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of snow this weekend. It's one of those deals where they're like, oh, we're going to get 4 to 5 inches of snow. And that generally means we're going to get 2 to 3 inches of snow. That's just been the way it's been for the last several years. Anytime that the news guys are like, we're going to get this much, it's going to be scary, then you're always like, yeah, whatever. Well,
the
they were like,
Snowpocalypse is coming.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to get 4 to 5 inches of snow. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then we got a little over 10 inches of snow. So it was a bit of a thing. It doesn't shut down Wisconsin, but it does definitely make you go, ugh, all right, well, especially when you live on a corner like I do. I grew up on a corner, and I swore I would never live on a corner again when I was an adult. And then here I am living on a corner. So you got twice as much, the sidewalk. Basically, you have to clear because you got to both ends.
Sure. Do you have a snowblower, or do you use a shovel?
So I do have a snowblower, but it is electric, which is awesome because it doesn't, it's not loud, and it doesn't give off that 2-stroke gas and oil mixture kind of horrible stink. And you come in the house and you have to immediately wash all your clothes because you just smell terrible. But the downside is that you could basically snowblow once, especially with big long sidewalks and all that stuff, and then you got to charge the batteries again. So you can't just continue to go or do it again later on quickly. You have to wait for the batteries.
What is this thing? Run by a pair of AA rechargeables? What? That is not much work.
They're big heavy things, and there was a lot of snow, and so I did cash them out. I got everything done, and then almost everything. Okay. I was very close to being done with the driveway. There was just a little bit left, and then it was just bloop, done. And you can buy more of those batteries, and I probably ought to. Actually, there's a cool thing. Those batteries, when you buy the snowblower thing, they come with this charger, and it's a company called Ego, hashtag not sponsored. But
if you want to sponsor us, reach out.
Definitely.
But they make snowblower companies.
They make this other product, which is basically a 4-pack charger. It only comes with 2 batteries, but it's assuming you already have 2 batteries from a snowblower or a lawnmower or whatever. And then when you plug in all 4, you can charge them all 4 at the same time. But when you've got 4 batteries plugged into it, you can also plug stuff into the charger, when your power goes out. So it's not a generator, it's just a giant honking battery. So if the power goes out in a storm, then you can just plug stuff into it, like your fridge or lights or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of cool, but we don't have that extra thing yet, but I'm thinking about it. So anyway, yeah. And then I had to, also shovel my mom's place and stuff like that. And it was just a
Sure.
lot of back and forth. And you would think it would be done, and then it would start snowing again, and you'd be like, son of a. So yeah, it's a lot of fighting with nature this weekend.
Well, winter will be over soon,
One does
and
hope,
that's a
yeah.
good thing. Yes.
Football season's over, and that's always a sign that we're heading towards spring. That's the way I always
Uh,
look at it.
I don't mind winter. I like living in a place where there's four seasons. I hate it in February though. Like I'm fine with it during sort of December and even January. I can tolerate it, but then by the time we get to February, I'm just like, okay, we've got it. Feel
I
like it. We've got enough here.
I
Let's
saw
move
an
on.
illustration recently that showed the way that the year works, and it was this line, and it's very long January, starting to go up like in a roller coaster, and then very long February, and then it starts to March, and then it starts to go down, and then it's just like all the rest of the months just boom, 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 and Christmas.
Yeah,
You know, what I
yeah,
mean,
that
and
sounds
that's
about
the way
right. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
about the way it works. Is that like the first 3 months are the longest months of the year, at least in a place where it seems to be, get cold and stuff like that. So. Otherwise, I did not get. I was going to do some painting this weekend, and I did clean out my wet palette, which had gotten weird. You know what I mean? I need to
No,
get some of
sure.
those. I need to get some of those copper things to put in there and see if that helps. Have you ever used those?
I have not. For a long time, I kept just copper wire
Mm,
in the bottom, and that helped. I will say I use this thing from, I had to look at the name, it's on my wall, from Mini Masterworks. It's called
hmm
Palette Guard. I put
mm,
about 8 or 10 drops in every time I refresh my palette. I refresh my palette maybe once a week.
yeah, yeah,
And I've never had any issues since I started using that stuff. It's generally, I think it's available from Elric's Hobbies in the US. Again, not sponsored or anything, but
yeah.
yeah, like last time I talked about it in a video, I know it's sold out, but I think it's probably back in stock now.
I it's usually I don't refresh my wet palette as often as you do because I don't use my wet palette as much because I do a lot more speed paint and washes and
Sure.
things like that. But yeah, this I do have to be clean it out once in a while when it gets weird. So I should. I think at Adepticon I'm going to swing by the Game Envy booth because they sell those little copper corners that are
Yeah.
supposed to hold your paper down, but also potentially
Yeah, the
help
idea is they'll
help with
also stop.
mildew.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
anti copper is naturally antimicrobial. Yes.
yeah. We cut down a tree in the backyard, or had actually somebody cut down a tree in the backyard, and then we didn't have them dig out the stump. And our neighbor told us to just get a lot of copper nails and drive them into the stump. And then over time, it would cause the stump to basically just kind of turn to dirt. And so far, so good. It's actually kind of working. I mean, we
Wow,
probably
it's
put like
crazy.
50 nails into it, that are copper, and they've just been there for a long time. And it's kind of starting to break down. So
Huh.
it's at the very least made it so that it doesn't try to
Be a
sprout
tree
or
again.
whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is important because
Stop trying to be a tree.
it was like right in a very bad place, and it was going to mess up our roof. So
Okay.
one of those things. So you were mentioning we were just talking about this before the show started. Games are on track, or the new game is on track.
Yeah.
We're within our dates and things. We moved. We're still going to launch the game at roughly the same time that we did the last game, which was Death Wizards. So we're going to launch the game basically the week before TMX, the Tabletop Minions Expo. So it should be like the last Friday in May, I believe, is the
Yeah. That's
general launch
current
date.
target.
But we're getting everything ready to go so I can go to layout sooner so that we're not pushed up against the wall and then put into a position like we were at last TMX where we didn't have any books to sell because we couldn't get them we couldn't get them in time. I
Yeah.
had kind of forgotten about that, to be perfectly frank with you. I was kind of like, just recently, I was like, oh, that's right. We couldn't sell the game last year because we didn't have copies. Dang. Yeah, so we're gonna fix all that. That's in progress. We're ahead of schedule. We're ahead of the schedule we had for Death Wizards. We then decided to make a
We're
new
now on our
schedule,
new
and
schedule.
we're on our
Yes.
new schedule. So that's cool.
I had to make
Yes.
a new project plan, new Gantt chart.
Which I
Uh,
appreciate because that's what you're good at. One of the many things
and,
you're good at, but
oh, well, thank
I'm
you.
not.
But well,
That's
I
not.
mean,
That's not what I do.
it's fine. That's just my
Yeah.
normal life. So it's just bringing in skills I do every day.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think, by the way, this is just a brief thing for later in the show because we're talking about what defines an indie war game. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
two people sitting around really trying to figure out the schedule for when you need to get all the steps done
Definitely
because you're all doing everything.
right on
Like
board.
that's
Yeah.
part of an indie war game for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, we're finishing up like as we're recording this, and obviously the audience, this has come out this is going to come out like long after we're recording it. But as we're doing this in the imaginary time in the past, future person, what's happening is we've just finished, or we're going to be finishing up editing here in the next basically 2 weeks at most. And the development is wrapping up this coming week. So basically that means the rules lock, and then the editor can work somewhat. The way we have it set up, the editor can work somewhat in parallel with the final development, because we make all the big changes first, and then everything else is just changing numbers and stuff like that. So that doesn't really affect the editing job.
And the cover's in progress, and the interior art is 5/6 done, perhaps something like
Sounds
that.
about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
Yeah.
So
we're good there. So we're happy about that. But yeah, because this is the second episode, like Vince said, we are recording it in the past. Well, I mean, you know what I mean.
More in the past than we normally would.
Yeah, in the future, it'll be closer to release date, most likely, to some degree.
Yeah.
So, but we wanted to bank like 4 of these right off the bat. So when we launched, we had them. And then that's, like I said, I read some stuff about how it's a good idea for podcasts and SEO and Apple Podcasts and blah, 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 blah. So that's the idea. And it also allows us to, be giving ourselves plenty of time and leeway that also, if we screw it up real bad, we can always record it again if we have to.
That's right. If one of these we have to dumpster something, it's not the end of the world.
Exactly. Yeah. So have you played or painted anything recently? I know you were showing.
Oh my goodness. I have been. So I didn't actually get to play anything this week, which is a shame. That's an unusual week. I mean, I played some Magic and played D&D, like I have other games I'm playing, but I didn't get to play any war games this week, which is unusual. Just the way it worked out. I ended up going to see Captain America instead. That'll probably tell people when this is recorded. So there you go.
Oh yeah.
But anyways, that like I had time to do one thing, and I decided I wanted to go see a movie because I haven't been to a movie in a long time. So, but I painted a bunch this week. That I did do. I finished up Droogs, or Drogs. I don't know what his name is.
I watched the video. Yeah.
I cool. It. Yes, I finished him up, the Goblin Boss. And that guy was really fun. Like, I talk about it in the video, and I'll talk about it. There's a part 2 to that video coming.
You explained it to me, and he did not look like what I thought from what you explained to me. But I
really?
like him. Okay. He's cool. Yeah, but I thought he was like skinnier, but with more of a beer gut, kind of almost. You know what I mean? Like when you get like those skinny
he's just
fat
generally
people.
Chubby.
Yeah, he's just a generally kind of chubby, like slightly disagreeable looking guy too. He doesn't look like he's having a good time. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, that's because the wolf is the main character. Like, the backstory of him is that the goblin is fairly replaceable. Like, the goblin dies all the time, but the wolf is actually really, really intelligent. And so the wolf keeps surviving the battle and then finding new goblins to be like to take the mantle of Drogs or whatever.
So he's like the power behind the throne in that situation.
Correct.
Yeah. Interesting. All right.
So the goblin doesn't actually matter much. Which is fun.
They rarely do.
But I finished that guy up, and then I've got a bunch of these 3D prints a friend gave me, and like they're cool, sort of bigger miniatures, and
like
basically millimeter? Like 75 millimeter basically. And this one was just like this crazy armored figure, and I looked at it and I said, I want to give that a try. I want to paint that up, and I'm going to put together a video on non-metallic metal on it. And then I got into it and I was like, oh my God, this is the most complicated armor in history. I remember there was a video once where Miniac was like complaining about edge highlighting on Space Marines. And I always thought that was very funny because like, I don't actually think Space Marines have that many edges.
Yeah.
But then this knight is made of edges. He's just literally every armor plate is 5 plates.
It's like an edge knight, basically, is what that is. Yeah.
Yes, his shoulder pad has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 distinct sections, all with edges. That's too many sections.
If it wasn't 3D printed, I would think it was made by GW.
Yeah, they would never go this far. This is
really?
Like so far beyond even what they would push. Yeah.
All right. I mean,
Although it would look great in metallic, just with like some dry brushing and sort of contrast type of stuff. You could do some good stuff with it.
Yeah. I did I painted up and finished and photographed a little bit and shared on Instagram for trench pilgrims that I kind of speed painted up. They're okay. They're not great, but I put them up there anyway. I just recently saw some talk about, and some of it was in my comments to some of my videos about like part of the problem to some degree with social media specifically is that people only ever put up their best work, and then that
Yeah,
kind of like
absolutely.
raises like kind of the expectation. And so I was like, well, I should try to take a nice sort of fancy photo of these guys that I kind of whipped out real quick on a Saturday night, basically, not including the zenithal and the priming and all that stuff. And yeah, they turned out fine. So that's not too bad. I did that, and then you guys, from when this the video will already be out, so I can talk about it now. But my upcoming video for this upcoming Friday, from when we're recording this, I am taking a resin printed robot and the exact same model STL printed then in FDM on my
Okay.
bamboo printer, my Bamboo Lab printer, the A1 with the 0.2 millimeter nozzle. It takes like 22 hours to print, but it's like the best
Wow.
possible print I can get for it. And my idea was to then paint them up as close as possible to the same, so you can really see the difference and everything like that.
Sure.
And so the the priming and the color zenithals and the highlights and all that stuff with the airbrushing, all the airbrush stuff is done. So I took them and I photographed them and did some video so I could show out, call out at this point, this is how they, and honestly, from even a foot away, you can barely tell the difference. It's not bad, really.
Okay.
When you pick up that FDM model and you start looking at the underside of it and you get it within 6 inches of your face, then you're like, oh, that's kind of a horror show with all the weird little hangy down bits and like the
Yeah.
undercuts and but when it's just sitting on the table, like I said, even from a foot away, like I showed the two of them to my wife. Um, and admittedly, we were in the den and there's like only like one lamp on in the den and then the TV. And she's holding them in her hands. And she's like, one is heavier. I'm like, well, that's the resin one. But I think what's going to happen, and this is me saying before I've actually even done it, so we'll go back later on and see how true it is. I think that once I start doing some of my paint techniques on it, it'll become a lot more clear, because I think
Oh, sure.
washes and dry brushing are going to show up
Gonna
very
pick up all that
differently.
micro detail.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's that I'm gonna. So it's gonna be very interesting to see how that's all gonna work. And plus, I printed one. The first one I printed wasn't great. It was okay, and then I tweaked the printer a bit. And I'm gonna take that first one, and I'm actually gonna use the same rust technique that I used on that big anchorite shrine,
Yep.
and then say, but how does it look when you really like texture the hell out of it and go to town on it and everything like that? And then we'll see how that turns out too. So this is maybe slightly interesting to people who are going to see this video, see the video later on of that and go, oh, he was totally wrong or whatever. But this is where I'm guessing things are at right now. I'll be finishing that video up this week and it'll go live on Friday, which I don't even know what the date is, but
Well, I think
coming up.
as long as our podcast is slightly interesting, we're crossing the bar we intend to cross, and it feels very on
Yeah,
brand for
I
us.
suppose that's true. That's a good point. That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, 3D printing is that one hobby I'm glad I never got into. It's like a whole separate hobby. I can't do that. I have friends who have 3D printers, and I'm glad for it. And I ask them for things when I need a thing.
With resin, I'm exactly on board with you. I really am. Like, I mean, you get such a better miniature, but it just is so many more little steps, and there's just more goop than I like. I'm not a big fan of goop in my life if I
Very
can help it.
goopy.
Yeah, and so there's that. But and luckily I have a friend who also has got like a side gig, and I can just I pay him and he prints things for me and they look great. That being said, that bamboo printer I'm super impressed with. And if you were like, as far as terrain is concerned, good Lord, it is just a terrain machine. It just
Oh, that
cranks
makes
stuff.
total sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
for that kind of thing. Yes,
Yeah,
100%.
and it's so easy to use. Like I think I told you this before. From the time that I cut the tape open on that thing, it was in the box. I cut the tape open, opened the box, to the time that I had the little tiny benchmark boat that everybody prints. That's like built in. They call it Benchy or USS Benchy. From the time that I cut the tape to the time that I popped that thing off the plate was less than an hour. Like it was
That's pretty
so
good.
yeah, it was really easy. So again, not sponsored or anything, but yeah, it was. I was pretty impressed with it. But regular, resin printing is still, if I can get somebody else to do it for me, I would prefer to do so. And
Always the way to go.
I think the people who are doing it, I think people who enjoy it and are doing it and like, getting paid for it, stuff like that, they're like the ultimate support class, like in our hobby. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
100%.
I'm glad for those people being around. And for if you're a person out there who likes resin printing and is just like, yeah, but I mean, just start talking to your wargamer friends, and they will pay you to print stuff, and you'll make some money. I mean, that's I
100%.
just FYI.
Well, that really feels like a very good transition point. Talking about indie support of the hobby through
Sure,
printing
that's true.
seems like a very good segue into the main topic, which is indie wargaming. Like, hey, what is this thing? What does
Exactly,
indie really mean?
that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to take a first crack at a basic definition here, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, indie is short for independent in this situation, and what that means
Which, as we all know,
generally.
is short for Miss Independent. It's all a reference back to the, of course, famous song that was released. Yes, we all know that.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
So it don't the kids will get it. Don't worry. And by the kids,
Okay.
I mean people who are in their late 30s, early 40s, and would remember the song Miss Independent.
Oh
Continue.
gosh, I don't think I've ever heard of that. Anyway, so independent is means generally indie games generally mean it's a game made by an individual or a small team, generally without the support of a larger publisher. Now, in a lot of other industries, books, let's say, for example, for the longest time, you didn't write books and get money unless you had a publisher. That's just the way it worked. Video games, you had to have a publisher to publish the game. You made the game, you had all the tools at your disposal for the most part, but without Sony or Xbox or Take Two or 2K games or like all those other, then you just didn't get into the local Target or the Walmart and all that kind of stuff, and it was a bummer. Um,
You weren't on the
and
shelf at Toys R Us. Yes, I remember.
exactly, yeah, exactly, or Walden Books, all these different places. I don't know if Walden Books sold video games. They probably did at one point towards the end. Um, but nonetheless, the thing is that nowadays it's far, far easier to publish without a publisher. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I
we've been
published
doing
my
it.
first game by myself in 2004, like
Sure.
self-publishing, right?
Yeah.
And it's only gotten easier since then as the
Oh, yeah.
tooling and the platforms and all of this stuff has only become more and more readily available. Obviously, YouTube supercharged this because,
Oh, for
you could
sure.
go search right now and just see like get 100,000 videos on like how to create your own, self-publish your own blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah, whatever you can imagine,
Mhm.
right? It's all
And
there for you now.
all those things that I mentioned before, where you didn't get jack unless you had a publisher, those things are no longer true. You can become a famous author to some degree, or not even that famous. That's the thing too. It's never always about like, oh, I got to be the big famous author. But you could be a selling author that people buy and pay attention to your books, and you could be just completely self-publishing through the Kindle app or whatever on Amazon, and there's
100%.
nobody between you and the consumers. There's no company, there's no middleman, there's none of that stuff going on. Same thing with video games. Like, admittedly, if you want it really, if you want people to see it, you need to get it in through Steam or something like that. But in comparison to like a traditional publisher, Steam, I think, only takes 30%, which a traditional publisher gives you less than the lion's share of
Yeah.
the money that comes from your work.
Well,
So,
I know a lot of the most successful books right now that are published, like reading books,
yeah.
not
Not
gaming
game books.
books,
Yeah.
are, often independent stuff or were originally or came from independent sources, right?
I think
Didn't
those
that like a Court of Thorns and Roses thing or whatever that's all popular now? Wasn't that originally
are we
like an indie
talking
title before someone bought it
Ge-
up?
George R. R. Martin?
No, not that.
Oh,
No, that the ACOTAR stuff. This is for the kids. Are you not familiar with this? It's part of the
I'm not
like
familiar with it. No.
sexy romance fantasy novel genre. This is like become a popular genre.
The only thing I could think of is I believe that 50 Shades of Grey was self-published first and then got monstrous.
Picked up. Yeah, there you go. It's
Yeah.
a similar thing, but like add in dragons and fantasy stuff, which
I
is
don't
good. That seems like that's an upgrade as far as I'm concerned on these types
Yeah,
of
I
things.
don't know how you do a 50 Shades of Grey book with dragons in it, but that I'm sure someone could figure it out. But yeah, no, that's the thing, is that we're definitely in an age now where it's far, far, far easier to be indie. Um,
I
And
think there's a new sub theme on this podcast of
yeah.
me making references and then seeing if you get the reference. That's definitely going to be something I'm going to continue trying to do.
I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I guess I don't pay as much attention to as much media as I think you do these days.
I try to pay attention to the pop culture, what the kids are interested in. Yes.
Sure, you're a big fan of
Uh-huh.
Taylor Swift. I don't know. Kendrick Lamar. I don't
That's
know.
like people who are like 40 or like that's are like your Taylor Swift demographic. Like
Yeah, I
that's
don't know.
the average Taylor Swift fan is probably like 37. You know what I mean?
Really,
Like
I
she's
thought
been making
it
music
was
since
little girls. I have
2006.
no idea. I don't know. I've been not listening to any new music since probably 2014, but that's on the high end. But nonetheless, the whole indie thing, and honestly, becoming an indie musician also far easier than it used to be as well.
Sure.
Um, Go
Yeah.
back into the 1980s and the 1990s and try to find someone who's a SoundCloud rapper. That's not going to happen. That's not a thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the whole concept behind indie wargaming is that you are, in many situations, a small team or an individual. And I think almost every game out there, there are certainly games out there that are made by a single individual. It almost always shows. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
It takes
even
such a panoply, a myriad number of talents to
absolutely.
actually make a successful game
Mm-hmm.
that I could not imagine doing this process all by myself. Every game I've made that has been successful has been a collaboration with that minimum one other person.
Yeah.
And like realistically, usually multiple that are also in on some kind of, very defined kind of contract work like editing or art or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Like if you look at the games that we make, there's me and there's Vince. That's two of us. There's Tom. There's Tyler. So now we're up to four. My wife usually kicks in and does some proofreading as well. So we're at five. And then there's usually at least one artist.
Yep.
At the minimum. But sometimes
That's right.
there's two. Has there ever been three? I don't think so. We were going to have
I think we
three on
ever
this
had
next
three.
one. But yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. And the fact is that it's, in some situations, and you get somebody who does layout. Like in our situation, I'm luckily able to do the layout and all that kind of stuff. I look at a game like Space Weirdos. I'm pretty sure that Casey did the layout. So Casey designed the game, wrote it, whatnot. I think he also did the layout, but he still found somebody to do the cover, which the cover does a lot of heavy lifting on that game. It really does. And so
Absolutely.
you definitely have to think collaboratively when you want to do, even if you're being indie. So the idea of an individual, there's some, but there's not as many as you'd think. And then what that usually means when you are doing that is, sure, you have a bunch of uphill battles you have to go through, but you've got some benefits, I think, as well. Being an indie publisher generally means you have more, well, you have an infinite amount of creative expression because no one, especially if you're an individual, if you're one of the rare individuals who can make a game completely by yourself, no one is going to tell you no.
That's right. And to be fair, it's not like you and I tell each other no very often. We just find the idea that like the synergy between what both of us think, like what's we generally improve each other's ideas. And I mean, that's really another thing.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of value in just having someone else in the process because your ideas probably aren't perfect. Like you're probably not Jack Kerouac, right? And so I mean maybe you are, but that's rare. Like that's 1 in a billion.
Right. Yeah.
Most human beings are going to improve their ideas by bouncing them off other people who and getting feedback.
Bet he didn't design or lay out any of his books.
Pretty sure no.
Yeah.
I don't think that happened.
Yeah. So again,
I think that like when you're saying what is indie, okay, we know that like we know the big companies aren't indie, right? Because they have like if you have a company that somebody owns shares of, you're out immediately. That's it right there. Okay.
Yep. I think if you have an HR department, you're not an indie company.
That's right. Yeah. If somebody if somebody in your company has like official titles, if you have like a system people log into or where they complete training,
right. Yeah.
Like these would be the markers of you're not indie. But the reality is there's lots of shops that aren't huge, right? But I still don't think of as indie. So like Corvus Belli would be an example. Like that's they're a company, they're not that big, but at the same time, I don't think of them as independent. They're well established. They have a lot of name. They have a company that is, big and like they operate within a structure that they have created. Right.
I mean, this is kind of getting a little ahead, but we've got a thing in the notes that says, "Is every miniatures war game indie that isn't made by Games Workshop? Like, is everybody except for Games Workshop indie?" And I don't think that is the case. No, because
No.
like you said, like Corvus Belli, Mantic, Warlord,
Catalyst Labs or whatever. Yeah.
Catalyst, Modifius, like all like there's a lot of different companies out there that Osprey, that are bigger companies and have, just because you make like a small little 64 page blue book because you're Osprey, that doesn't make you indie. That just is like, that's you're throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks and see what turns into Gaslands. You know what I mean? Like that's what you're
Yeah,
doing to
sure.
some degree. And that's
I don't know.
fine.
I honestly, the Modifius and Osprey examples are interesting
Mhm.
because for most of those examples you said, I'm with you, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're like BattleTech is not an independent game, right? It's been around for
No,
a long time. It's established. There's hundreds and hundreds of books and all this kind of stuff. That's fine. I think that seems like you can look at that and go, yeah, not indie, right? And to some degree, by the way, this conversation is going to be like that old canard of, I don't know where the line is, but I know it when I see it. I
sure.
don't
Yeah,
remember the
exactly.
Chief Justice that said that, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, he was talking about pornography, I think.
He was, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's gonna kill me that I can't remember that Chief Justice. My Supreme Court historical knowledge is lacking at the moment. But
Dang
anyways,
it.
Warren, maybe might have been Warren. Anyways, tell me in the comments if I'm right.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyways, but the reality is a lot of times with Modifius and Osprey and people like that, they often end up as sort of umbrella publishers where they will publish smaller independent games,
Yeah, both of those
like
guys
from
have
independent
reached out
creators.
and like put out like social posts saying, "Hey, if you've got a war game idea, like hit us up," And then, then in that situation, it's definitely not indie in that they're then taking care of all of the stuff. They're taking care of the artwork. They're taking care of the layout. They're taking care of the book design, and I'm sure editing and all that jazz. And
Sure.
then you get like a royalty as the writer.
Yeah.
I think that's another big thing about indie is that in indie you own it.
That's probably true. I don't know. To me, that kind of rides the line. If somebody like, I could see the argument that that's still indie and I would be supportive of it, frankly. I think that's just like, the reality is, as we said, there's so many skills that you have to be
Mhm.
successful within this field. I can't do the layout work. You do. I don't have the eye, the training, the knowledge. And you and I are lucky that our skills complement each other in a really sort of fortuitous, synergistic way.
Absolutely.
But there's plenty of people who just don't know anyone with that skill set.
Sure.
And if they publish their game through Modifius or Osprey, regardless of like the ownership thing, I still think that's an indie game. I really do. I would still be generous to that thing. Now, of course,
I think there's a
the
difference
kind of
between
like
an indie game and indie sensibilities. I think that there's definitely
that
indie
could be
sensibilities coming from that, but it's
okay.
still there's a big company on sitting on top of it. You know what I mean? But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well, how big is Modifius and Osprey? Like, what is that?
I
What do
think
they have?
Osprey's owned by an even bigger company.
Oh, okay.
Something that starts with a B. It's not Bloomberg, but it's like something because when I get emails sometimes from Osprey about like, oh, here's a new Frostgrave or a new Stargrave, it always comes from some other like name, something publishers, which I think is the parent company of Osprey, and
Okay.
it's a whole thing. But yeah, whereas Modifius, like I think they're a smaller company. I don't think that they're publicly traded. Like we've talked with Chris
Yeah,
Perch? No, Birch. I was like, it's either pine or it's birch. I knew it was a
the tree.
tree, and Chris Pine is that guy from Star Trek, so it's not that guy. But yeah, Chris Birch. Who's we've talked with him before at different shows and such. But yeah, I think that yeah, again, you have more creative expression when you do things yourself because there's nobody there to tell you don't. Um, this can be both good and bad, obviously. Um,
Yeah, I mean, look, my answer is a lot of those Modifius or Osprey games, or frankly, like independent games as a whole. I think you just hit on the real thing, which
mhm,
is you can be more innovative, more risk taking, more
mhm,
whatever, right? You know, the reality is with all games and game design, the beauty of the thing you would think is that you're only limited by your imagination, right?
yeah.
You would think that's the case.
Well, yes.
Now, of course, with big companies, that's not the case at all. You're limited by 1,000 factors,
Mhm.
right? Everybody's weighing in, decisions are made by committee. no, we don't want to go that direction, blah, 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 blah. Like 1,000 things are going to impact what they release.
I think if
Okay.
we had been working with a big company and we were like just two design guys working with a big company, I think they would have told us not to do Majestic 13.
Probably so. And I mean, like, from a sales perspective, they would have been right that it would sell less, which is
Sure.
true. And they, they're like trying to pay attention only to the bottom line, but that's just
Exactly.
it. Independent, game designers, publishers, in the end, if you're doing this, you have the ability to care about other things. Like you have a passion project or a passion for this thing. The game is a cool idea. So you make it, right?
I mean,
Like
that's the
that's what
thing.
it comes down to.
Majestic 13 is probably one of my favorite games that we've made. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, so definitely, like the look and the vibe of it for sure, but also just as the game, the way it works and all that kind of stuff, it's very different from some of our other games. And so when you have that indie sensibility or that indie ability to do what you need to do because you're doing it yourself, then you can do whatever you want. And then you don't have a big company that goes, what if we dial that back a little bit?
sure.
Look at Jeremy from Black Magic Craft. Like if he was going through a big publisher, I don't know if like he could work with with Idols of Torment. Like I think there's
Yeah.
like visuals and concepts potentially that are in that game that a big company would have been like, we might want to shy away from that a little bit. You know what I mean? But he can
Yeah, sure.
do what he wants because he's running the show, and we can do what we want for the same reasons.
Yeah, really, the only limitation, and you and I think about this and talk about this a lot,
Mm-hmm.
sort of in our space, it's interesting the difference here between the various different kinds of independent games. So what I mean by that is if you're doing an indie role-playing game, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it truly is more or less whatever you can imagine. All right. There
Yeah.
is no limitations because in the end, an RPG happens basically exclusively in the minds of the people participating in the game session, right?
Mm-hmm. Between the ears.
Um, yeah, exactly. It's all up there. It's all theater of the mind, you
Indeed.
see. Uh, whereas, it's not constrained by rules need to exist in this format or there's a physical component to it or so on and so forth. Okay, fine.
Mhm.
With even indie wargaming, though, it is interesting that there is still a theoretical restriction of do miniatures exist for this thing?
Right.
You and I have talked about this a lot, right? The robot squirrel conundrum.
Indeed.
Yeah.
People will study that in school in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically what we mean by that is like you could have the coolest idea in the world for a robot squirrel game, and it could be a really amazing game, but then either you have to go and then bring in more skill sets because you got to get somebody to sculpt or you have to be able to sculpt or whatever, a set of robot squirrels to go with your game,
Right.
right? Or you have to hope that they're just out there, people don't mind proxying, or maybe printing out little pieces of paper like, old school Games Workshop
Mhm.
stuff, right? Your chariot was just a little piece of paper in a standee.
Just stand it, card stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that like when you look at a game like Death Wizards, like there's a lot going on there and it's very cool, but it is, and you were kind of flipping the script by having like the protagonist to some degree be technically the bad guy and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But basically you need skeletons and zombies and stuff, and some like paladins and a ranger and what, like it's all models that people can find and probably already have, or if they don't, they're easy to pick up at your local shop. Those like whiz kids, like not pre-paints, but the other ones. And so you have that kind of constraint that is put on you. If you've decided to make a cool game about cars crashing into each other and stuff like that, like something like Gaslands, well, Matchbox cars, it just makes sense.
Right. They exist.
But if it was
Yeah.
like, well, but this game I've designed, the cars have to be a foot long. Well, where am I going to
Sure.
find a foot long car? I mean, that's the same thing. You're always kind of looking at it from the aspect of what are the physicalities within this that you are dealing with. 90, let's say 95%. I've not taken a poll, but I'm going to say 95% of indie war games have a tendency to be miniatures agnostic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a rich history of this
Mhm.
coming out of the historical wargaming space.
Oh yeah, well, pretty much
Right?
all historicals were miniature agnostic. You just needed
That's right.
French guys didn't care where they came from.
Exactly, because it would be more about the like you needed these guys for this pike and shot or whatever, right? Like whatever's going on,
Yeah, yeah.
and whatever time period you're setting it in. People would get it, the historical wargaming tradition very much has this like people getting hyper specific, right? Napoleonics and like each time period, American Civil War, whatever, whatever, whatever,
Mhm.
right? And so, and the reality is there's just a huge amount of people producing generic historical miniatures from basically, the last certainly 400 years in
Absolutely.
detail. So you just know, like, oh, there's going to be some Perry Brothers sculpts out there for that or something.
Exactly. And so in that situation, knowing that, it was very easy to write a rule set, knowing that it was going to be very simple for people to be able to source the miniatures that they're going to need. And it's still in this day and age, like most of the people who do, indie war game design are depending upon that. What I do see sort of frequently, and these don't seem to sometimes hit, is I am seeing people who are like, we also spent a lot of money on models and this and that and all kinds of stuff like that. And then if they can't market it properly, it really puts them behind an eight ball because they've already spent a whole bunch of money up front. And it doesn't work for everybody. Case in point of someone who did work for, obviously, is Trench Crusade. Like when
Yeah,
they
sure.
launched that Kickstarter, they had no idea how much money they were going to make, but they had already, I'm assuming, I haven't asked. I should probably I'm hoping to talk to Thomas at Adepticon. I'd like to chat with him because
Yeah,
I would
same.
love to know if I think it would be amazing to find out like whether they were like, look, we'll pay you this much up front. And then if we make this much, like if there was like a contract with the sculptors where they would get paid more if it did more on the Kickstarter, or
Yeah,
whether they paid them all up front out of their own pocket and then it went crazy and then the sculptors didn't get any extra cash or, who knows. But in doing that, yeah, I don't know. I keep talking about this lately in different channels and stuff like that, but I refer to it as the curse of big time. I think if you, especially as an indie game designer, are like, yeah, but my game is required that it has to have these cool miniatures, and so I got to go through all of that. You are now falling prey to the curse of big time. Like if you would just maybe tweak your game a bit so that it could be using, I don't know, Space Marines or dudes in plate armor or whatever, you wouldn't have to put yourself in such a situation where you're so far behind in how much money it costs to sculpt this and all that kind of stuff and everything like that. So indie games are always riding that line. It is far easier than it used to be to produce indie games because of the digital stuff,
sure.
whether
100%.
it's for the miniatures, whether it's for the
There's a lot
books.
of indie games that only have digital rules, period.
Oh yeah,
Right. Or
most
something like that.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of them, honestly. Like when the first game that I designed with my friend Peter was back in '92. They didn't even have PDFs back in '92.
Right. Sure.
PDF I don't think was a thing until
Did you
'90.
etch it into stone tablets to ship it out to people?
No, we went to Kinko's. We went to Kinko's and we made 24 copies of it, and we produced it in booklets that were small enough to fit inside of a jewel case of a CD. For the kids in
Oh,
the
okay.
audience, a CD is a compact disc, and it's what
Yep.
music used to came on before it was Spotify. But but yeah, so we would buy plastic jewel cases. We'd take the black plastic part out that holds on to the actual CD, and then it was
Mhm.
just like this plastic kind of like flappy book thing, and then everything fit inside there, and it was clear, so you could see the artwork through it. And then, because at one point we went to a box manufacturing company, a small box manufacturing company here in town, and we were like, we need to know how much it's going to cost to make boxes for our game. And basically, the bare minimum they could do was 500 boxes. And they were like, but you want like artwork on them, right? Like a color wrap. And we're like, yeah, I think that's what that, yeah. I mean, it was a situation where they threw us a number that nowadays I would look at and go, that's relatively reasonable, honestly. But back then we were like, but no, I don't have,
Sure.
like it wasn't the type of money that we could have and everything. So we did everything and did through CDs. Like, but the thing is, we always had to explain to people every time they pick it up. We'd be like at a convention, they'd be like, "So there's a CD in here?" We'd be like, "No, there's no CD in here. It's a
Yeah, that's
CD
the
case."
problem.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had to put it on the back that says there's no CD included, and it's just. But it was always trying to figure out some way to be able to do that and distribute it. Well, now our games, for example, are distributed through Wargame Vault, which is part of the parent company for Drive Through RPG, which is a much larger organization, but they're all the same organization. Drive Through Vault is a smaller kind of slice of that whole entire pie. But people all over the world can, in minutes, have our games in their virtual hands
Yeah.
via that.
well, this is one of the places where, so like when thinking about what is an indie game, right? The
Hmm.
question we're at here, I think it is not defined by its size or success. So what I mean by that is like, I think Trench Crusade is an indie game. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of the fact it made millions of dollars in its
Hmm.
Kickstarter, I still
Hmm.
very much like when you look at its distribution model and its creative side and stuff like that, it's still to me an indie game. So I don't think that having miniatures or not having miniatures defines you as indie game. Like as you said, there are indie games where people produce miniatures. I would agree with you, especially for your first game, if you're a
Mm,
potential designer, that's
yeah.
like a very much a trap. It's a
Yeah.
trap. But like, so
I
that's not it.
I get
It
that reference. That's from Star Wars.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes. You're catching the ones from 1970.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, 1983.
80,
Because
yeah,
technically
something like
that's
that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not wasn't the original Star Wars, obviously.
No.
Um, but like so like I don't think you can define it based on the size alone. I don't think
No.
you can define it based on the presence or absence of miniatures. I do really think that when it comes to it, the nature of being independent really does have to do with the size of the sort of operation, right? That is happening that creates it, and almost like a sensibility around it. I really do think there's kind of a an amorphous there,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I think there's definitely it is in many situations a force of sheer will that will
Right.
cause these games to come out. Um, you look at something like Trench Crusade as an example. Like that was literally just an art idea that Mike Francina had several years back, and he was just like, "Oh, this would be cool," and he would just do cool pieces of artwork, and then eventually it turned into at this point a going concern. And the thing is that let's say, I don't know, maybe 5 years from now, they might not be an indie game anymore. It could be like a good
Sure.
sized company, the whole deal and all that. We don't know yet. But at the very least, right now, $6 million or not, it's still an indie game because it's a relatively small group and they're doing things with a very indie kind of sensibility. And I think that there's a big benefit in the indie idea as well, especially as you're starting out. I have talked to too many people who have been like, I've got this idea for a game. It's got a board that's 5 foot by 5 foot. There's 700 cards. It's going to be in a box like this and all this stuff. And we're going to try to get it into distribution. And I think this is maybe a topic for another show. It's in our list of topics, but I think that your magnum opus maybe shouldn't be your first game. And I think that that is
100%. Oh,
definitely,
that's a whole
yeah,
discussion
yeah.
on its own. Yes.
But that's
People
definitely
get
the
really
indie
obsessed with that.
idea. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They think, well, I got to shoot my one shot. And you're like, well, no, start off by making fun games that are 4 pages and see what happens. And the thing
Yeah.
is that you can, 30 years ago, if you were like, I want to make a fun 4 page game and see what people think about it, you'll be talking to the people at your local shop. You'll be talking to your friends and family. That's it. You know what I mean? Now you can
Yep.
put something up and people in countries all over the world can pick it up and be like, "Oh, that's really kind of cool. This is scratching the itch that I have or whatever." The thing about indie games these days that makes them so, I think, attractive to the people who create them specifically and to the people who enjoy them as well is that they are very at this point easily distributed by the creators and they're done, either digitally or there are some creators out there who are like, well, I got a website. You come to my website, you buy a thing, I'll ship it to you. That's fine too. But there's so many other options for being able to ship things digital, transmit digitally, do
Ship,
all that
quote
kind of
unquote.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And the downside in that situation, and I'm not 100% sold on how much of a downside it is, but the downside is that very frequently those types of games aren't available in stores the indie games. There are some
Yeah.
stores that get into trying to make sure that they have some indie games in stock. But for a lot of stores, they're like, we need to make money. And so we're going to put the big sellers in here.
Which is totally fair. Like
Yeah.
and that's another thing, right? Like I think that again, that's that the presence of it being indie means it usually has some kind of limited distribution or usually
Hmm.
directly from either an aggregator from the people themselves or whatever, which means they're harder to find, right? These are to some degree, diamonds in the rough, right? But I think it's a really important part of the ecosystem. What I mean by that is we talked about the innovation, the presence, the fact that they're pushing the boundaries.
Hmm.
the reality is these indie games are bringing new concepts, new ideas, new thoughts, all that stuff into the ecosystem, and it ends up trickling up. I don't know, whatever you want to say, filtering up. I don't know,
Yeah.
uh, to the larger producers, who then oftentimes will also, like, people who make games at big companies are often deep fans of games, right? And so play a lot of different games and pay attention to the indie space,
Yeah,
and will often
exactly.
harvest or, quote unquote, like, lift ideas. And by the way, I don't, there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
I mean,
lifting general concepts and stuff like that is
the
is what just what people do.
most recent edition to Kill Team added solo rules and co-op
Exactly.
rules. And
That's
I think
100% that's something they stole from the indie scene.
well, from us is what I'm trying to say. I mean,
Oh, I
it's absolutely us. No, it's not. But it is interesting that we've produced like 4 different games with solo and co-op rules, and all of a sudden GW is like, oh, look at us with our Kill Team, yada yada
no, but
yada.
that's just it. There's a lot of indie producers that are doing solo and co-op, and that's because the indie producers are, let's be honest, they're simply closer to the audience than the big companies, because they are the audience,
Yes, oh for
right?
sure. And they're also in most situations, and this should be something that you, if you're interested in making indie games, you always should keep this in mind. It will probably never be your job. Like this
Right.
is neither of us, not for neither, and we're doing okay with our games, but for neither of us, this is not a livable job. It's this
Right.
this is something we do on top of several other jobs, and that's fine. But the concept of like I want to make this solo game, like in general, a solo game is not going to. There's a lot of people like I see in comments on my videos, like why would I ever play a solo game? And I'm like, well, maybe you don't have friends, or maybe you just want to play in the middle of the night, or you just there's all kinds of reasons to do it. And the
Yeah.
indie people can take the risk to make that happen for you. Whereas
Mhm.
GW is like, we'll tack it on to this one sort of slightly smaller thing, and we'll see how it goes. And I've talked to people who've thought it was neat, the new version of Kill Team
Again,
with
speaking
that.
historically, there
Yeah.
have been solo role-playing game experiences
Oh,
going
for
back
sure.
to the basically early 80s, okay,
Hmm.
that I'm aware of. Maybe there's other stuff back before that, but um because they realized sometimes it's just hard to get a group together, but you still want to, experience something, have fun, like, there's a reason solitaire exists. What are we talking about here? Like, yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's, so I think that but that's a great example, right? That's something that the independent scene created and pushed,
Hmm.
and then bigger publishers eventually latch onto because they see that it has traction.
Yeah.
And that's my point. The independent producers, because they're not constrained, and it is that sensibility ultimately that I think defines it, they can be more creative. Now you'll get, a lot of swings that are misses,
Oh yeah.
okay, of things
You
that
get a
don't
lot of
stick or
weird crap out there that maybe 5 people dig, but when
right.
those 5 people find it, they're real happy about it, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think that there's immense power in that, right? Because it lets that sort of, I mean, it's kind of a marketplace of ideas to a point where a lot of people are creating stuff, and then hopefully uh sort of cream is rising to the top or whatever, right? Would be
Mhm,
the
mhm.
idea. Where those best ideas then get picked up by other independent designers. They get put in their games in some way, shape, or form. And then it builds and builds and builds. And that's what ultimately moves forward the wargaming uh, hobby, right? Is that kind of innovation.
Exactly. Like if you look at, games from you look at miniature games from back in the 70s and 80s and compare them to the rules and things like that for today, it's even in the non-indie space, it's a very different kind of thing going on. And that is just due to the fact that, you know, designers begin to innovate and come up with and like again, you're right, it's way more swings than than hits, but
Right.
every once in a while you
Right.
get those hits when you're all of a sudden like, oh, this is a cool concept. I mean, if you just look at the way that like Mordheim is, even in comparison to Trench Crusade, written by basically the same guy, but there's things you can point at and go, oh, this is definitely kind of his vibe, but then there's also like, yeah, but this thing that was kludgy back then has been figured out. And just having the ability, if it was just like the top 10 companies out there that were producing stuff and nobody else was, we'd have far fewer at bats to make changes. But when
That's
you've
right.
got thousands of nerds like you and me hanging out in our basements and making weird stuff, and then eventually all of a sudden something comes interesting comes of it, that helps move things along in general.
Yeah, it's like experimenting with mayflies versus trying to experiment on a person or a human being or something, right? When
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing like treatments, because it's the life cycle, you get just like 1,000 mayfly generations in 1 year of a human life or whatever, right?
exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's what you're effectively doing.
Basically, what we're saying is that indie games are mayflies.
I mean, often that is the case. It pops up fast and then it's kind of gone, right? Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. A lot of them do end up being a sort of flash in the pan.
Or is it fruit flies?
I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't.
know.
But it's probably fruit flies for like actual experimentation. I just know mayflies don't live very long.
Yeah,
But
I didn't do that. So.
I think that like ultimately, you raised another interesting side point there that I do want to hit on, is
Mhm.
that oftentimes a lot of independent games can end up being made by people who at one time worked in the gaming industry and then left. Not
Yeah,
all. There's plenty of people who've never had like
yeah,
an official job or anything
sure.
like that making independent games. But you mentioned Trench Crusade. Obviously, there you go. That's somebody who was involved in the with major companies for a long time. And there's
Mhm.
a bunch of this that happens. Sometimes they leave, they start their own bigger companies themselves. Sometimes they leave and they just start being a gunslinger for other companies. Sometimes they leave and make their own stuff and they bring the knowledge and experience and things like that they have. But now their sort of creative freedom is unlocked, right? No longer are they constrained by their corporate overlords,
Oh, absolutely.
which
You
is a good thing.
don't have to listen to the suits. Yeah, no, I think that's a big thing is that not only is it the scope of it, it's how you're publishing, it's all that kind of stuff, but it is kind of back to that like what you were talking about, the sensibilities where you can become a little unchained to quote a friend of ours and be able to do what you want to do and if there's not as big of an audience for it as you might have thought, that's okay as long as there's some audience. And even if there's no audience, you still made a thing, and now that can help inform you on your next thing. I
That's
think
right.
that's the biggest benefit of indie gaming is if you're doing it right, and by doing it right, I mean you're not betting the farm on it, you're not putting your mortgage on
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
then you can do things and play. And sure, back in the day, if you were going to like try to actually publish something, some indie thing, and you had to get it printed and find a print shop and ship it to people and all that kind of stuff, that was still daunting. Nowadays, you can literally make a PDF and put it up on a place, and maybe somebody will buy it, maybe they won't, or you could put it through itch.io, or you could put it through, I don't know, there's all kinds of different services out there now. Put it out there for free, if you want to. Like
Sure. There are lots of
Bill,
people who do like pay what you want, or which is,
yeah,
which can be zero on
um,
Wargame Vault because they just want to get their ideas out there.
yeah, Bill from Berserker Works. I've met him. I don't know if you've met him. I've met him a couple of times at Adepticon. He's a real nice guy, and he's got a big Instagram and whatever. And he made this game called Mech 28, which is just basically this robot game that's like 28 millimeter size robots and whatever. And it is done. It's a TXT file. It's not even a
Amazing.
PDF. It's just a TXT file, and it's free. So I mean, yeah.
Does he have ASCII art in
Oh
there?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Not for
Heck yeah.
everything, but like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the logo is basically ASCII art. Yeah, absolutely. So
Amazing.
there's all
Like
kinds
I'm
of
downloading a game guide for Phantasy Star 2 in
exactly.
1998 off the internet. I love it.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's I think very cool. And the ability to be able to kind of stretch your legs um creation no, not creationally. Creatively is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. It does help. It does help a lot. And so, this podcast is talking a lot about indie games, and we thought it would be smart to actually try to help define that so that people would know what the heck we were talking about. But I think one of the big main takeaways from this podcast as we go, part of the plan that Vince and I have talked about is we want to get people to make indie games, and so we thought it would be a good idea to define what they are and show you how they're you know over time we're going to show you how they're not as hard as you might think, but at the
That's
very
right.
least we're in a pretty good spot for indie games in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I think the summary for me here at the end of the episode
Hmm.
is an indie game is defined by one, having a small team, could be one person, could be a couple people, like a small group with a real creative vision that want to bring something to life that's available in sort of non-traditional delivery mechanisms, usually done through digitally, or like maybe they have a
Print on
print on
demand.
demand or
Yep.
something like that, right? And it has the sensibility of being innovative and different, and it, like we said, may or may not have miniatures, doesn't matter. May or may not actually become hugely successful, doesn't matter,
Mhm.
right? But it's that sensibility of this is an individual or a small group of people's vision of some story. I don't mean that like lore. I mean story, like the game world in toto or whatever
Yeah, yeah.
that they wanted to bring to life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that would be, to me, that's what defines an indie game.
Yeah. And the suits didn't get involved.
No suits.
Yeah.
Suits are bad.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think we nailed it. If you've got questions, you could ask us.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You can ask questions. That's
yeah.
a thing you can do.
Mhm.
There's going to be comments theoretically down there somewhere where you can put in comments and ask questions and do stuff like that. There's probably also places where you can like this or rate it or do those kinds of things. You
We
should do
got.
all of that.
I did write an outro this time.
Oh, okay. I'm ready.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
your
No,
outro.
yeah, yeah.
I'm excited.
All right. So thanks for checking out this episode of the SNARLcast. We hope we were able to teach you something. Please check out our website at www.snarlingbadger.com/snarlcast for more information and more episodes. Follow us on your podcast software of choice. Leave a review if you get the time, and we appreciate your time. See, now I got to fix that. I said time twice in the same sentence. I'm going to. We're workshopping. This is what we're doing.
We're workshopping it. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
I think you
Not
you
bad.
got
It's
something
okay.
there.
And
Yeah.
and we are considering, we're trying to figure out whether we want to have this be a YouTube podcast as well. Now, like, you're not going to see our, smiling faces because that's just extra work, but at least have it available there. And if we do that, then it will be easier to do comments than on other things.
That's
But
right. I think we should tell Adam we should.
yes, well,
Everybody get together. Tell Adam we should.
it'll
Email him.
it'll be a bit more
Hit
work
him
on my
on Blue
part.
Sky. Tell him yes.
You can definitely reach out to me on Blue Sky. We'll have to. Well, we do have a Blue Sky. We have a Snarling Badger Blue Sky. So we
Yeah.
yeah.
Hit us up on Snarling Badger on Blue Sky. Say,
Yeah.
Adam, turn it
There
into
you
a
go.
video.
There you go. So we're working on that, and we're working on the outro a little bit more. But again, we want to say thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you much. Bye.